Good morning. I'm Tony Momberger from the Redlands Daily Facts, doing another video interview as part of our 125th anniversary of Redlands series. This morning I'm with former Mayor Bill Cunningham, who really has led this town through a lot of changes and has a lot to say this morning. I'm excited you joined us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, you bet. Your name was one of the first ones we wrote down when we planned this out. Absolutely. You served on the City Council from when to when?
From 87 to 99.
Wow. All right. Why did you join the City Council? Did you have something in mind you had intended to accomplish when you...
I had been on the school board for 14 years.
Here in Redlands?
Here in Redlands. Mm-hmm. And we were suffering significant impact with regard to enrollment growth. And the City Council was not terribly supportive of charging fees to developers so that we could build school facilities. In those days, Prop 13 did not allow general obligation bonds, so we had absolutely no avenue of funding except for the city. And
when you say there was a problem with, you're saying there was too much enrollment, not that there wasn't enough enrollment.
The enrollment growth was beyond our capacity to hold kids. So rather than try to beat our head against the wall, we sued the city successfully. And I decided to run for council in order to have a school's voice on the council.
And did you? Were there changes?
Yes, yes indeed. Redlands actually led the state in terms of charging school fees for construction.
Wow.
We pioneered that concept.
All right.
We feel very pleased about that.
So you had already had a long service in leadership or government of some kind in this community. How long had you been in Redlands when you ran for council?
Well, we came to Redlands in '52 purely by accident.
How did that come about?
It came about from the standpoint I had graduated from SC, and I went to the placement office to seek employment and interviewed with Dr. Milliken at Chafee. Mm-hmm. Was offered a job at the JC. Beverly and I came out and had lunch with him, I think perhaps for him to assess Beverly. Uh-huh. And we had the rest of the day to us, and we'd never been in Redlands. So we drove into Redlands with the idea of going to Big Bear. And we turned east on the first major street, which was Citrus off of 99. Passed by the high school with that magnificent old three-story vine-covered structure. The stark white library building out front, and clock off to one side, and Beverly said, why don't you go in anyway and interview? I refused an interview in LA because Redlands had the reputation of being the poorest school district in terms of pay in Southern California. So I went in, met the principal, and...
Who was the principal at the time?
Garn Haycock.
Okay.
And I candidly told him why I hadn't interviewed, and he said, well, let's go over and see the superintendent. And Ross Spear was the superintendent upstairs in clock. They offered me $100 for coaching football and $100 for coaching track and $100 for whatever I don't remember, and also the possibility of living in the superintendent's house, which was on Beacon Street. There were 4 houses on Beacon Street.
Okay, and, I'm going to back you up. You said Citrus off 99. For those who don't know, 99 was the boulevard, right? Redlands Boulevard.
Right.
Okay, where's Beacon Street?
Beacon Street no longer exists, although there's a stub of it, but it's now under the parking lot of the boys' gym.
At the
Redlands High School.
Okay.
And in those days, of course, Fern went through also. But so we had a golden opportunity, and I could walk 2 blocks to my classroom upstairs in the old building, and it was nirvana for us.
Really? You called Dr. Milliken and declined the job at Chafee?
And I declined.
Wow.
The application was in my pocket, the contract was in my pocket. And no, it was, and it's been a love affair with the town ever since.
Yeah.
And so.
Wow.
And contrary to what most people seem to feel, we were welcomed in immediately. Maybe because I was part of the coaching staff, but I just felt part of the community instantly. And,
what kind of memories have you got from coaching track and football? I've heard some pretty big names tell me that you were their coach.
Well, in those days, Buck or Weaver was the head football coach, and he lived in another of the houses on Beacon Street. And there was Walt Anderson and Oral Baker. They were the staff with Bob Chambers and I. And then later I worked with Frank Sorrell, who went to the U of R. And of course Bob Skolton and Ray Haight were my compadres in track. So it's a wonderful time.
Yeah, you're part of a real big legacy there.
At the age of 25, I fell into where I wanted to be.
And how long were you at RHS?
19 years. And probably would have finished out my career there, but Gordon Atkins had been named the design and development president for Crafton Hills College. And we had done some pioneer cross-age teaching with the elementary schools, with the physics club at the high school. And so the thought came that I had been at BCIT for the summer, British Columbia Institute of Technology, and Gordon wanted to model Crafton Hills over Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. So we had some commonality. And the idea was that I would go to Crafton, and I was working then, I was basically the de facto astronomy department at the U of R at the time. So we would wed the university, the community college, and the high school. And hopefully the symbiotic relationship would really nurture all three.
Do you feel that it did?
Pardon me?
And did it? Do you feel there's a good...
Gordon died abruptly. Bill Moore became the planning president, and then the whole thing kind of went sideways.
And he just died last month or 2 months ago.
He died, Bill went on to be chancellor of California Community Colleges. Very bright, capable individual.
Okay. So what years were you at RHS?
From 52 to 99. Wow. I beg your pardon, 71.
71 to 99.
And then from 71 to 86, when I retired, I was at Valley, and I was 15 years at the U of R.
Okay.
Part-time at the U of R. I taught physics and astronomy in the evening at the U of R.
And then what years were you on the school board?
From 73 to 87. I chaired the board the last 6 years.
My goodness. I have so many questions coming in my head so fast. I may need to pause the recording. I can't even think of where to start. While you were on the school board, did anything dramatic happen? Any big changes? Any big crises that are worth recording for the history?
Not really. Those were very good years for the schools, and the only problem we were having was school housing. In '78, the city approved 7,800 new dwelling units, and we had absolutely no room capacity for children. I suppose the most dramatic development that happened during that period of time is that we were contacted by Mobil Oil Company. They had just bought the 1,710 acres of East Highlands Ranch, and they proposed 38 homes plus commercial centers on that ranch property. And the request to us was to provide housing for 3 elementary schools, a junior high, and a third of a high school, with absolutely no funding stream at all.
And Redlands High School was the only high school for Loma Linda, Mentone, Redlands, Highland.
And part of San Bernardino.
Wow. Yucaipa High School was there already?
Yucaipa High School, when I first came to Redlands, was part of the Redlands School District.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That was, so we got serious overcrowding then, and about to be more.
Yes.
Okay. What a mess. Rev was built in, I want to say 98, as the second high school to serve that population?
I would suppose it would be about that time. I'm not precise in that time frame.
And then Citrus Valley has just opened up 3 or 4 years ago.
And I would guess that probably we will start seeing a redundancy in school housing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as the population peaks out and the population matures, typically the number of new children tends to fall off. So you'll find the more mature school districts in the metropolitan area, where I grew up, for instance, at 3 cities went to Redondo High School. That district built 5 high schools and has closed 4 of them.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Now Redlands has, I want to say, 6 high schools, maybe 7 if you include the privates. I know 5 of them are public. If you include, why wouldn't you? Orangewood and Grove, the charter school and the continuation
also you have
high
Arrowhead
school.
Christian.
And Arrowhead Christian is a private and Packing House.
And in the district is Loma Linda Academy also.
So, yeah.
So,
and you're predicting that we may not need that many at some point?
I would guess in the future we may very well see one of the schools closed.
Wow. Okay. So let's move.
Not likely in my time, but very likely in yours.
Let's move to City Council, your tenure on the City Council.
Okay.
So you got in there and you made the difference in schools. What else did you do while you were on the City Council?
Well, there was a secondary, maybe it was the primary motivation for my entering the council, and that is in 1978, the people of Redlands passed Proposition R. Mm-hmm. The people, at least the people I associated with, felt that the council violated Measure R in 1985 by approving the 2 major apartment projects out on Barton. We're talking about the 496 unit development on the south side on the old dairy property, and across the street the 540 unit development there.
And Measure R restricted development, right?
Measure R restricted development to 400 dwelling units per year. What happened was that the council accumulated those permits, if you will, so we had massive development at one time. I was contacted. I had been working in the canyon with a group called Save San Mateo Canyon, and we were opposed to the development of a major motorcycle raceway in the canyon. And I chaired that group, and I had been peripheral to the Friends of Redlands because they met at the University of Redlands in the library.
The Friends of Redlands?
The Friends of Redlands.
I have not heard of this group.
Yeah, you haven't?
No,
okay.
What is it?
Well, they were the group that pioneered basically growth management in Redlands. Oh. They formed in 1977, put Prop R on the ballot in 78, basically had thought that they'd accomplished their purpose and fundamentally disbanded. Those people, or the pioneers, the go-getters of that group, if you will, got together and invited me, and by default I ended up as their candidate. We also then put Measure N on the ballot at the same time in 1987. And that not only restricted the number of dwelling units that could be built in the community, but also forced the preservation of open space and citrus, which was a primary goal. Because there was a great deal of controversy in the community with regard to development south of Sunset, and there was also significant loss of citrus in the community, being replaced basically by, if you will, ticky-tacky boxes. Mm-hmm. And many people felt that wasn't Redlands, and we needed to do something.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I'm thinking 1977, they built the tract homes along Church Street where there were groves. They built the Lewis homes right around then, didn't
yes.
they? And,
yeah, Lewis homes were a little later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there were projects going in, especially on the north side, which was being developed very, very rapidly. The groves were going out. So that was basically the premise upon which I ran, and I was very interested also in historic preservation, and the council was moving very well in that way. Our group was formed called the Redlands Association. The City Council in '87 appointed a Redlands 2000 committee of 100 individuals in the community. They put together 41 goals for the community. I think the goals are valid today as much as they were then. The problem was that the council would not implement the goals. And so we became kind of a sore point in trying to push them constantly.
What were some of the goals on?
Some of the goals had to do with preservation of open space, preservation of downtown, the idea that growth should be moderated so that Redlands would have a build-out population that would leave us as a community rather than simply a suburb of Los Angeles. The idea that we would have defined boundaries, for instance, the Emerald Necklace concept, all those were factors in it.
We discussed this, we run these videos sometimes out of order, but the Emerald Necklace concept, for those who didn't watch the Shirley Leonard video, is a ring of open space, basically, yes, around Redlands.
Open space, citrus, agriculture, right.
That in perpetuity cannot be developed. It would be protected
that is the concept, yes.
Okay. So was the policy that there would be no development, that it would be limited development, that it would be conditional approval for development?
No, the only thing we did, we set the maximum goal for the city at 400 dwelling units, and in the sphere, which would include Mentone and to the west, 150 additionally. The idea would be that many dwelling units in a year would produce essentially 1/3 of an elementary school, which meant if we developed at 1,200 dwelling units in a 3-year period or 1,600 in a 4-year period, we'd need another elementary school.
Now, when you say would produce, you mean through property taxes could provide funding for?
No, just on the demographics of the people themselves. In
okay,
other words,
so you're saying would
new
create
development
a need
typically brings young families, and young families typically have children. In the district at that time, there was about 0.8 child per dwelling unit in the district that was school age.
Okay, and most of the development was coming in near, I want to say, near Franklin School, near Smiley School?
Well, the major development in those days basically was on the north side. It impacted Ligonia and Franklin particularly, and to a certain extent Smiley, in the area west of that, which was all Groveland, and a good deal to the east around Crafton.
Okay. There was the issue with, and maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, the Santa Mateo Canyon flood control channel. I recently learned that you led a suit. The city sued the Army Corps of Engineers for the way that flood control was built?
Well, the flood control project had its genesis basically in some property owners in the Hospitality Lane area and also in Loma Linda that were eager to develop in the floodplain. The floodplain was under FEMA restrictions, and they petitioned Congressman Lewis and the Corps to channelize the creek. And the original proposal was to put a dam significantly upstream from Redlands that would have had an embankment of 280 feet.
Now, there was a need for something to happen, right? We had a major flood in 38 and in 69.
In other words, if we're now discovering, as people in the Midwest right now in flooding are discovering, that it's probably better to not levee, but let nature take its course and let the rivers spread out in their floodplain, restoring the soils.
In danger?
Redlands was never in danger, and part of the conflict that I had with the San Tim project was that downtown Redlands is under FEMA right now, and buildings have to be built in an elevated situation. And Redlands' needs, defined by the Corps, were greater than those of San Tim and Loma Linda. So I pushed for funding for flood control in Redlands as having a much higher priority because our downtown had been threatened a number of times, rather than putting the money into an unjustified project at San Tim. Corps of Engineer projects require a benefit cost ratio of $1.25 for every dollar spent. The San Tim project penciled out at 49 cents per dollar spent, even after development. In other words, it could not be funded under Corps rules. Lewis then folded it into the mainstream project, which is Prado Dam and Seven Oaks, and therefore brought the ratio up to where it could be funded. A little legerdemain that happens from time to time with what's called congressional discretion.
Okay.
But at any rate, so the first proposal was to put 18 sediment basins starting at Alessandro and to concrete about 4.5 miles of the creek in a trapezoidal channel. And the first move that the Corps made was to define that as a water project and therefore not subject to either NEPA, the National Environmental Act, or CEQA, the California Act. We sued,
Which
the
would
Redlands
mean,
Association
to
sued.
the layman, right, that an environmental impact report didn't need to be created.
That's what they were saying. They were saying this is a water project, and domestic water projects are immune. So we sued and successfully prevailed, and so they had to do both a national and a state environmental review. That gave us the leverage then to begin to bargain. Loma Linda was adamant about moving forward with their project as rapidly as possible. So the first 2.5 miles or so are a concrete trapezoidal channel. We managed to fight and save what was Section 3B, which basically begins at Barton and runs to Alessandro. And we've managed to make that into a soft bottom channel that still has some environmental assets that are important to us.
Okay, because the concrete would be detrimental, according to the suit, to wildlife and flora in the area?
There'd be no habitat, no flora, no corridor, for instance, for wildlife movement. Concrete channelization, about that same time, LA had been concreted, the Los Angeles River had been concreted in the 30s. Now they're tearing it out and restoring the river, as you perhaps know, with the Friends of the River, very, very active there, to where now on the LA River there's about 26 miles of basically wild river out of the 52-mile length.
The city recently purchased a large part of that canyon and opened a sanctuary. Then under the stewardship of the Conservancy has opened this sanctuary with hiking trails, and they're going to put in an amphitheater, and there are picnic spots.
That was EPA money.
I took a tour of this, and I was looking at the flood control. This is the only reason I know anything about this is because I was looking at it. And I was thinking, if they own that, don't they have the ability to do things to it, to alter it? And here the city just bought this land.
Well, the flood control channel, certainly, you know, right now, they've cleaned out the basins. And I calculate the annual cost of cleaning those basins is in the order of $1 million a year. When they remove all the habitat in the basins, when they do that, they take all the vegetation. Zone 3 includes Highland, Redlands, Loma Linda, Yucaipa.
Okay, the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't pay for that?
No, local taxpayers pay for that. The county is divided into 5 flood control zones. This happens to be Zone 3. Ordinarily on a Corps project such as that, the beneficiaries should pay by assessment. The assessments came in large enough that the property owners protested. So a deputation went to Washington and got a Corps of Engineers loan. And the people of Redlands are now paying both for that loan and for the annual cleaning of the basins. Although the amount of benefit that redounds to the people of Redlands is minimal at best. We're by far the largest taxpaying entity in Zone 3.
Is it Loma Linda that gets the greatest benefit?
Loma Linda gets the greatest benefit, and one can't quarrel with the fact that Loma Linda really suffered in '69 especially. Yeah. Some flood management could have been done. In fact, we brought in, by that I mean Redlands Association and the San Mateo Conservancy, brought in a number of skilled consultants that had done Napa River, for instance, up at Napa. That's very, very nice environmentally. Actually, the Corps' guidelines during this period were that environment should be preserved. And this was the only district that was still pouring concrete rather than trying to do something on an environmental basis. So there was a good deal of arm wrestling over quite a period of time. Fortunately, the Redlands City Council was very empathetic with trying to save the creek. So we had some leverage as an elected body and also controlled the area where the creek would have been impacted.
Who served on the council with you at that time?
Well, that depends. At that particular time, it would have been, I guess at the highlight of the issue would have been John Friedman and Gary George and Jenny Banda and Pat Gilbreth and myself.
Okay. And Councilwoman Gilbreth is currently on our council.
Yes.
So she's been there a long time. Okay. What can you tell me about what I refer to as the Doughnut Hole? I know some people call it the Citrus Plaza. I know that all was a contentious issue when you were serving.
In 1989, Norton Air Force Base closed. Mm-hmm. And the legislator that represented this area at that time got a redevelopment agency that took in all lands within a 3-mile perimeter of the base. That 3-mile perimeter included south of Barton and east of Orange Street in Redlands, which would have meant that a redevelopment agency out of Norton would have controlled basically 1/3 of the city of Redlands.
And what was there at that time?
Where?
North of Barton and...
Well, you know, we're talking here east of Orange Street. We're talking about developed sections of Redlands.
So there were homes
So if
there?
anything had been built in any portion of the city, it would have been under the control of the redevelopment agency, and money would have flowed to Norton rather than to city coffers.
Right, but at the time, were there homes there? Were there orange groves there? Were
there were
shops?
orange groves, there were homes, there were factories.
Okay.
In other words, it was basically a slice of what is typical of Redlands today.
Okay, but Redlands didn't have any say-so or gain financially from
could
that.
gain absolutely nothing from it and can lose. So the city council sued, and that dragged on for some time, and we achieved a stipulated judgment in which Redlands was excluded from the IVDA. An airport authority was formed, and we became a member of that. And any taxes that were to occur in Redlands' sphere of influence, which included the Doughnut Hole, were either to be spent 1/2 in the Doughnut Hole or the other half to flow to the city of Redlands. So we were effectively made whole by the judgment that we achieved. In 1989-90, Loma Linda moved to LAFCO to annex San Mateo Canyon and a portion of the area west of that. The city of Yucaipa was incorporated, and a sphere of influence had to be formed for that city. And Norton was also being closed. It was a fairly dynamic time.
Yeah.
So Redlands moved to annex the canyons, and I basically was a spokesperson for the city on that. We also, at that time, annexed the half of the Santa Ana River Wash because Highland was casting covetous eyes on extending their boundaries to the bluff, and also attempted to annex the Doughnut Hole. We succeeded in a compromise with Yucaipa and with Loma Linda on the canyon. We had 9 miles that were in our sphere. We ended up with 7. We did lose to Yucaipa, Crafton Hills College, which was in our sphere at that time. We had provided sewer and water to there with the idea that it would become a part of the city. And we also gained the half of the river that we hold today, but the Doughnut Hole property owners refused the annexation.
Was there any discussion of annexing Mentone?
That came later.
Okay.
That came with the controversy with Majestic, but it also was involved in the Doughnut Hole issue.
I didn't mean to throw you off course, it just occurred to me that Crafton Hills would have been segregated by Mentone from Redlands. You can't go to Crafton Hills without going through another.
Well, Mentone was in our sphere.
Okay.
Which, in fact, Mentone, by state law, should become a part of Redlands at some point. There's no reason for it to become, essentially, except for, and here we go off on another tangent, and that is, there was a developer who proposed 1,000 homes on what was then called Sunrise Ranch, which is in Green Spot. The residents of Green Spot were very much concerned about being captured by Highland, and also were very much concerned about that 1,000 unit development sitting out there in an isolated area. They petitioned the council to annex to Redlands. For them logically to annex to Redlands, Mentone needed to be brought in. We could have run a finger out there and done it, but the state logically very strongly frowns on that today.
There's a whole story in there, and I've just pulled you off on a tangent because we're at the point where the Doughnut Hole refused to be annexed. So I'm going to pull you back on track here, and then maybe we'll get back to the Green Spot annex, because that Sunrise Ranch thing I know is,
okay. Well, then again, that's in play again with the Harmony Project,
yeah.
And Lewis, and I'm involved in that battle at this particular time. But
okay, I'm going to circle back to that. So we're at the Doughnut Hole.
Let's go back to the Doughnut Hole. The Doughnut Hole then came to the fore again in 1995 when Majestic Realty approached the city with regard to developing the 120 acres that they own. At the same time, a group led by Jim Barton proposed a 3 million square foot major shopping center at California and I-10. Also, we had another project called...
Which side of the 10? Where Farrow's is or where the Walmart is?
You know where Farrow's is today?
Yeah.
That whole piece in there.
Okay.
55 acres would have been to that. Kaiser bought 38 acres at that same time. At the same time, there was the Pavilion project where Walmart is now proposing, and there was the Redlands Crossing project proposed where Home Depot is today. So I was confronted, and the council was confronted with 4 different major competing commercial projects all at the same time. In the mix of things, it became fascinating. The city was sued 9 times, basically by Majestic, trying to stop the other developers. Lewis took over the crossing project and then bowed out because of the conflicts.
You're talking about the Lewis Homes Company,
yeah,
or not Jerry Lewis?
No, Lewis Homes, which they have a commercial division, which is more active today than a residential division. And so we then became, as I guess the best term would be, an arm wrestling match with who would be the succeeding developer. Both Majestic and the developers in the West, which are Taubman, which is the 4th largest mall developer in the country at that time, over who would get the majors. They were angling for Macy's and May Company and Broadway. And that conflict or that competition collapsed when the people that own Inland Center spent $16 million, enhanced that significantly, and the majors decided to stay in what was then a decaying center, but was very significantly modernized. So we were then, the people in the West, the Taubmans dropped out. Majestic could not find a tenant for their project. Finally, in around 2001, 2002, after I was on council, Kohl's decided, out of Wisconsin, to open 30 stores simultaneously in California. And one of the sites chosen is the Doughnut Hole. That then gave the anchor for that development, March of that year, that succeeding year. We then, again, this is the Redlands Association, not the city, did what we could to force Majestic into the city. I met with Ed Roski and his partner.
When you say that, you mean to force them to build in land that is
annexation
actually
of the
Redlands?
city. We had spent in the Doughnut Hole $5.2 million putting in water and sewer on a promise of the 1989 county general plan that as development occurred, it would automatically be annexed to the city. The county then changed their general plan, protested by all 24 cities, and eliminated the control of cities over their over their spheres of influence, basically. In terms
After
of
Redlands had put the water and sewer?
After Redlands had made that commitment.
Was there any restitution to Redlands for that investment?
No direct. It's now being utilized, at least in part, by the Majestic development and Pennies and the other development across the street, that kind of thing. But at any rate, we forced Majestic to seek out the two things they had to have, and that was water and sewer. They could not build without both. Majestic drilled 2 wells, claimed that they were acceptable.
And this is where Citrus Plaza is now?
Yes.
Okay.
And every water expert was agreed that given time, the drawdown would draw the perchlorate plume to those wells, and they would go bad. The other issue was sewage treatment, which was critical. They had an authorization for what's called a package plant, but a package plant put on that 120 acres, you have all kinds of problems with regard to the effluent. In the wintertime, you could use it for irrigation in the summer, and also what to do with the sludge, which was a really difficult issue. Was
this grove at the time?
It was all citrus grove.
Okay.
And so they would not enter into, well, I received a promise from Roski in the final analysis that they would annex, and that fell through. But then they applied to San Bernardino because there's a major trunk line in Mountain View Avenue that basically feeds Loma Linda. And Redlands years before had bought a 17% fraction of that line, but then had given it up basically for utilization and had built a major pumping plant for sewage at the corner of Mountain View and San Bernardino Avenue. Mm-hmm. You may have noticed that structure out there. So San Bernardino reluctantly agreed to give the 17% to Majestic because in the long run, San Bernardino was going to have to utilize that 17% as Loma Linda grew.
Wouldn't they already have water for irrigating the groves? Wouldn't it already be plumbed?
But that would not be potable water.
Okay.
So the Redlands Association sued San Bernardino and stopped San Bernardino. So Majestic had no place to go for sewage. And the water was problematic, but sewage was a critical issue. The council then approved the connection of water and sewer, the rerouting of the sewer for Majestic in direct violation of Measure U and the city policy that dated from 1970. What was Measure U? Measure U was the successor of Measure N, although Measure N was passed by 71 or 2% of the population. In '95, the city council sued to overturn Measure N. Okay. We then put Measure H on the ballot in 1995. The Redlands Association did. And these are restrictions or allowances for development? They are basically management of development. Okay. Yes. Okay. Majestic spent $250,000 to defeat us with H in '95. We came back with U in '97, and that prevailed by about 70% of the electorate. So H would have given more freedom for development, and no, H would have healed what had been taken away by the court from Measure N.
Okay.
Although the city prevailed on Measure N, the court still awarded us all our fees, and all the elements of Measure N were still law. They were no longer general plan, but they were zoning ordinance. So the city basically, or the council basically, had a Pyrrhic victory. They won in court, lost their costs, and we ended up with everything we needed anyway.
And what did these laws and victories mean to the people of Redlands? Does it mean they're getting more shopping? Does it mean they're getting more revenue? Does it mean they're supplying more without getting paid for it?
Do you mean with regard to these initiatives?
Yeah.
The initiatives basically were controls on residential growth. They spoke nothing about commercial growth. In fact, we encouraged commercial growth. We were very much concerned about the proliferation of small lots in Redlands. Houses were being built on the north side on 50 by 100 and 50 by 150 foot lots. We felt it was important that both the north side and the south side of Redlands should be built out in a similar way. So
where on the north side were they building these tiny lots?
All over in the side of Redlands.
Okay.
You go out on Church or in a lot of those streets, Pennsylvania. So we put in place a minimum lot size requirement of RE density, residential estate, which was 14,000 square feet. We knew that developers would prefer not building to those sizes on flat land.
About a third of an acre.
A third of an acre. But our goal was to have the developer, in exchange for being able to build at a higher density than that, although limited, that they would be required to set aside 20% of their land to be put in open space and landscape primarily in citrus. Mm-hmm. So Measure N and Measure U, for instance, if you look at the Standard Pacific project on East Lagonia, those 28 acres are a direct benefit or a result of Measure U and N. If you look at the Israel Beale Park,
by community
that
field.
also is a direct product of Measure U. So Measure U and N over the past years has saved for the city, with no cost to the city whatsoever, about 50 acres of citrus.
Okay.
In fact, one grower, John Mullen, who was a prominent attorney in Orange County, knowing of what we were doing, came out and gifted the city a 5-acre grove in Pennsylvania. Wow. Because of our efforts in trying to save the culture of our community.
We're beginning to run out of time. I want to wrap up the Doughnut Hole thing. What we ended up with, is that what you had hoped for? And what exactly is the circumstance now with regard to that? That's not Redlands. You're not spending money in Redlands when you shop at Target.
Well, the net result in the Redlands Association losing, if you will, is that there was a very, very strong campaign that it needed to be brought into Redlands in terms of sales tax agreement for a 25-year period where we would get 90% of the sales tax.
Okay.
And the people voted for that. We campaigned against it. So as it stands today, and the promise, first of all, was that we would be, or the threat was that we would be losing $18 million per year. That later, in a later campaign, was $7 million per year. The Doughnut Hole has never produced more than $2.5 million a year. In other words, hyperbole in politics is well worthwhile if you've got the money to convince people.
You campaigned against getting 90% of the sales tax?
Well,
because
we campaigned constantly and tried to get a writ against the city to force the city to only give utilities to the Doughnut Hole on annexation.
Okay. You wanted to apply leverage.
We fought
and say,
from the
you
very
need
beginning.
Us,
yes.
So we have to annex you. Okay.
And we had that lever up until the city gave it away. Well, now we have 90% of the sales tax, but no planning control, no property tax, no business licenses, no inspection fees,
so
and no control over what is developed out there.
I heard there was a city council meeting recently where some people wanted to build a 500-unit condominium The city said, no, you're not going to meet our criteria. And they said, fine, we'll build in the Doughnut Hole. And then, of course, the Walmart Supercenter that was fighting for 8 years or so is saying, if you don't let us, we're just going to build in the Doughnut Hole across the street. So,
and of course, that's a constant weapon.
So it's a leverage weapon there that people are using.
We would have removed that weapon
okay.
with annexation. And we now, as far as I know, are unique, perhaps in the United States, other than the city of Los Angeles with the 2 square mile Vernon sit in it, which is a constant problem. Mm-hmm. We have a 2 square mile hole in the middle of our city, the prime development land for commercial and otherwise. And the likelihood, and I wouldn't be at all surprised at that, we're seeing proliferation of warehouses. And all you need to do is drive on San Bernardino Avenue. You can tell when you leave the Doughnut Hole and you enter Redlands with exactly the same kind of warehouses and the difference in landscaping and quality, for instance. We felt, and I continue to feel, that it's a cancer. I don't know how we'll really solve it. And as it develops, the money that we receive, the 90%, is to pay for police and fire. And our costs, for instance, for police today far outweigh the $2.5 million that we get for both services.
Okay. Is it possible for...
So it's going to be, on the long term, it's going to be an anchor around Redlands' neck. It was separated out by special state legislation. Roski went to Sacramento, spent roughly $2 million, according to people that are familiar with the situation, and basically bought special legislation in violation of state constitution for a special legislation for a piece of property. Never had it been done before, and it was in violation of the Constitution. We sued to reverse that. Mm-hmm. And that suit was dropped later after I left the council. But that island should never be there. I mean, it's in violation of all state law.
Okay. This is so interesting. I wish we had another hour to keep talking. Is there anything else from your, well, from all of your experiences, I was going to say from city council, but that I need to ask you about, that it would be a crime not to get on this recording? Well,
as I said at the very beginning, you know, Beverly and I came into town and fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. And that love affair continues. So, you know, I'm now on 18 acres of dirt trying to walk the walk as much as talk the talk.
All right.
And,
what is it
Redlands
that you
has been wonderful to me.
What is it about Redlands that you
love?
Well,
from the very beginning, when Beverly and I came to town, there were 20,000 people. And there was a sense of community. In fact, the high school football game on Friday night was the social event in Redlands. Yeah. I mean, in a town of 20,000, you'd have 5,000 Redlands people in the stands at the university. And there's still that sense of community. And
I never missed a Friday night football game.
I'm a Southern California kid, and I've seen so many towns, especially those on the periphery of the metropolitan areas, that lose their identity. Mm-hmm. We somehow have managed to restore that identity or retain it, in part because we have natural barriers, the Santa Ana, the 2 canyons, the hills to the east. So we're very lucky in our physical setting. But you know, Redlands is still a wonderful place. You know, I'm beginning another battle as of Monday. I wrote a letter to the city council, and as I don't know if you read or not, but the county has a landfill in the canyon, and the county has signed a contract for a minimum of 800,000 tons of Los Angeles garbage and waste to be dumped in that canyon every year, a minimum.
Okay.
And I think Redlands is now a destination for the garbage of our neighbors to the west.
That's not the city-owned landfill.
It's not the city-owned landfill. The city has no direct control.
Okay.
I wrote to the council pleading that they do something with regard, probably can't stop the landfill.
Is there anything they can do?
They could set, the firm that was chosen was fined $1.3 million for air quality odors in their operations. That operation in San Tim is upwind from southwest Redlands. And so they can do something in terms of setting certain requirements, certain monitoring. And also, when the original landfill was developed, I was on the county solid waste task force. And by basically waving my arms and shouting, Redlands receives $1 a ton as a mitigation fee for the impact of the landfill on the community.
I want to make sure we're clear because it gets confusing. The city-owned landfill is out in the wash, or near the wash.
Right.
The county landfill, we always called it the dump,
is
just up if you go behind the hospital into the canyon and over the bridge. It's right there on the right.
Yes.
And that's the one you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about. So I couldn't get an inflator, which meant that now that $1 is worth maybe half as much, although that money was accumulated and the road was repaved.
And an inflator would have meant that it was the
That
money
the
increased as
CPI
time
or whatever,
went on?
so it would increase over time. Landfill tipping fees have doubled, and we're falling behind. So my letter to the council was that we should renegotiate that, and we should seek an additional fee from the standpoint that there's going to be a huge incremental increase in traffic. When you also consider the commuter traffic in the canyon and the rest of it, that the city should set a goal of widening the canyon road to modern standards. It's a rural country road with bike lanes on either side, because there are a number of people that jog and bike out there, and they really take their lives in their hands. So here's a golden opportunity. If the county is going to make $22.3 million in profit out of bringing that trash in, people of Redlands deserve a piece of it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and that's going to really affect, I think, the freeways. That's a lot of wear and tear on the freeways that we use.
It's a huge addition. We're talking about, in 11 or 12 years, 10 million tons of trash.
I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know anything about
into this county.
Well, I'm glad you brought it to my attention.
But,
okay.
So I'm somewhat of a, Don Quixote. I'm constantly jousting at windmills.
I just thank you for your lifetime of fighting for what you believe is best for the city of Redlands.
There's a major fraction of the community that I don't think agrees with me, but...
It doesn't matter what side anybody's on. I think if you're going to get up and fight because you believe it's best for the community, you need to be thanked for that. I know you put your neck out, people are going to criticize it.
Well,
I experienced that myself.
My sons and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren are here, and I hope that I don't have much time left, but I would like to believe that they get to enjoy just a little bit of what I've had.
I appreciate
that. It's been a wonderful trip.
Yeah, you certainly have impacted the history of Redlands up to now. So.
Well, I still, I attend most council meetings.
I know you do.
And I'm not averse to standing up there and making a comment. Typically not well received, but I make it anyway. And I guess I'm reduced to a gadfly at this point, but there's one thing, and that is I probably know as much about the city, and I'm not trying to be egotistical, as anyone in the community. And that is I've been close to the schools, close to City Hall for 40 years. I stay active. I'm still involved with an irrigation water company that I manage and run. By the way, it's the 125th anniversary of that water company. We talk about historic things in Redlands. That happens to be one that people tend to forget about, and that is our water system for irrigation, which is a beautiful piece of engineering that people put in 100 and some odd years ago. So at any rate, I thank you for asking me to be interviewed. You don't know whether it's been meaningful or not.
It has.